Good evening. I'm Randolph D. Holhut. I'm the Deputy Editor of the County Source for independent views and news and everything else. And welcome to our first edition of Voices Live. We hope this is going to be a regular event where we're going to bring in people from around the area to talk about issues that affect all of us. And maybe all of us can learn something by the time it's all done. Tonight, we're talking about the path toward a post-nuclear economy, life after Vermont Yankee, what's next? And we've assembled a pretty good panel here for us tonight. And I'll let them introduce themselves to you, starting with Chris Campany of the Wyndham Regional Commission. We're going to all let them have about 2 minutes to talk about themselves and tell them what's their thoughts about Vermont Yankee.
Hi, Chris Campany, Director of Wyndham Regional Commission. Thanks for having this forum. I know a lot of people are probably anxious to have community discussion. Wyndham Regional Commission, we're the Regional Planning Commission for 27 towns in southeastern Vermont. All the towns in Wyndham County, Reedsboro, Cedarsburg, and Wind Hall in Bennington County, and Weston and Windsor County. We became involved in the discussions around the Certificate of Public Goods for Entergy Nuclear Vermont Yankee about 7 years ago, and the Commission purposely took a neutral position on whether or not the plant should receive a Certificate of Public Good and whether or not it should continue to operate, specifically so we could facilitate conversations among all sides within the region. This was particularly, we particularly participated in the Public Service Board hearings and have represented ourselves pro se, meaning we represented ourselves. And we did this all without a budget and relied heavily upon volunteer commissioners, especially Tom Buchanan, who's here tonight, and have to thank him for his photographic and encyclopedic memory. If you ever have a question about what was said and what page in some document filed in a Public Service Board hearing, he can probably tell you exactly where it is. But our sole focus really has been on what should happen when the plant eventually decommissions. And so when it was announced, we basically already had the position based on what was the evidence in the docket about what was in the best interest of the region when the plant eventually closed. So glad to be here tonight and participate in this conversation.
Thanks, Chris. Thanks, Randy. I'm Pat Moulton-Powden. I'm the Director of Workforce Development for the Southeast Vermont Economic Development Strategies and the Brattleboro Development Credit Corporation. Soon to be Executive Director of Brattleboro Development Credit Corporation. That's a lot of words there. So I too want to thank you very much for having this forum and the chance to be here tonight and to be on this distinguished panel. We knew Vermont Yankee was going to close someday, so it's not a big surprise, but it's here now. So having a date certain sort of steps up the urgency of everything we've been doing at BDCC and CEVEDS around economic planning for the future of this region. And CEVEDS has been engaged for a number of years in really assessing what's happening in our existing economy and how are we going to get our economy, which has been troubled for a number of years, back on its feet. And the closing of Vermont Yankee exacerbates that. But the good news is you have organizations in BDCC and CEVEDS who've been thinking about this for a while and have a plan. And most important, have been thinking regionally and working on helping this region come together and realize that our problems are shared, our assets are shared. So putting together a regional plan has really been the main focus. And we have that plan, and it will be unveiled on December 5th, so I invite everyone in advance notice to an event on December 5th to hear more about the comprehensive economic development strategy being developed for Wyndham County. But one of our immediate concerns really is the employees at VY. There's a lot of excellent talent there, which is an asset for this region. We want to retain as much of that talent as possible. We need those folks to stay in the region, particularly the young people, because there are too many of us that are 50 plus, and we need more of us under 50. We have a lot of work ahead. We need to continue to think regionally, leverage our regional assets, and keep in mind this is a marathon, not a sprint. None of this is going to happen overnight, but working together, we can accomplish a lot of good. And I think now's the time, regardless of your stripes, pro-nuke, anti-nuke, for us to come together and work on really rebuilding that regional economy. So I look forward to the discussion tonight and glad you all are here.
Good evening. My name is John Mullen. I'm a professor of urban planning at UMass Amherst. About 20 years ago, I got the assignment to do the assessment of the economic impacts of the closing of Yankee Row. And I wrote a paper on it. And I do an awful lot of writing, but it's incredible. The most popular computer downloading article I've had in the last 5 years is that darn article I read about 20 years ago. The topic is certainly timely, and the topic is going to impact all of us. And I think there's a whole lot that we can learn from places like Yankee Row and some of the others. And the thing of it is that it is not the end of the world, and we're going to pick up and go on. There are things that you can do. My experience beyond that has been, I've worked probably in 15 different military base closings, and I've worked in about 5 or 6 mental hospital closings. So I'm very much aware of what I'll call the Big Bang, for lack of a better phrase, that happens. And it happens to all of us, and picking up and organizing, getting our resources together, and hopefully with that theme tonight, we can all get some takeaways that's going to benefit all the communities. I'm happy to be here, and thanks for inviting me.
My name is Raymond Shaddis. I am a technical advisor to the New England Coalition on a consulting basis. I retired from that job in 2006, I think it was. And I've been a trustee off and on of New England Coalition since about 1981. That organization, you should know, has been engaged on Vermont Yankee environmental and safety issues since the plant, well, actually since before the plant was actually licensed back in 1971. So we have some skin in the game. I also served as a delegate from the only environmental organization, environmental activist organization directly involved in the decommissioning of Maine Yankee Atomic Power Station, and served on their community advisory panel for about 7 years. What I missed tonight, and it's not to lay blame or fault here, but what I missed tonight particularly is the presence of a representative from Entergy Vermont Yankee. And the reason may not be what you think. Maine Yankee Atomic Power Company, in negotiation, in conferencing, in communication with the community, and also our own environmental organization in Maine, did I think, its level best to soften the Big Bang, to soften that initial impact. Workers at Maine Yankee were offered retirement packages, those that had built something toward their retirement. The workers, if they could possibly be, were retained for the decommissioning. We dropped from 470 workers down to about 135 for the first couple of months of decommissioning. 4 years later, we had 430 people on site working. So that over the 7-year period, that impact was leveled out. A similar initiative took place with taxes, and maybe we can talk about that. Yeah.
And I'll also take the time to say we did invite representatives from Entergy to this panel, and they respectfully declined.
Next time.
Maybe next time.
First of all, I'd like to thank Randy, Chris, and Leah for putting this together. It's a good event, and it's time that we do move on. As I've said to many people, what we've had in Vermont is somewhat similar to a civil war. We've had Vernon, DY versus Montpelier, the North versus the South, however you want to phrase it. The Civil War is over. It's now time for recovery. And rehashing old battles will not get us to recovery. what we need to do is move forward in a positive fashion. I must say, VY has reached out to our community to talk about what we're going to do for a tax base and how we're going to proceed forward. We've always had a very symbiotic relationship with VY, and we don't anticipate, while it won't be the same warm, fuzzy relationship it has been that we want negotiating, we're looking for a positive exit for the plant. And we don't see any reason why that can't take place. I am the representative for Guilford and Vernon, which puts me in a strange situation because if you take a poll, 90% of Vernon likes the plant. Only about 40% of Guilford likes the plant, so I always had to dance the line there. But I think in all matters pertaining to the plant, I've been very fortunate. I found the members of both communities to be receptive to a message and to be considerate and really respectful in listening to both sides. So I'm very pleased to represent both towns, and it's been a positive experience. I've also served on the school board for 25 years, so I've had that relationship with VY. I think what we have now is an opportunity to develop a recovery plan and develop that recovery plan without looking at it's a new plant. What we're looking at is we have a major employer with an impact of 1,288 employees leaving our state. It doesn't matter if it's a tool and die industry, it doesn't matter if it's a nuke industry. We've lost a major employer. And I'm hopeful, and with Pat's leadership, I've worked with her before on the Natural Resources Board. She is very intelligent, very well versed, and I think we can move forward in a fashion that we will show other people that when you lose a major industry and you have an impact of tens of millions of dollars on your community, you can recover from that. And I'm very positive that we will come up with a forward-thinking recovery plan and demonstrate to other people that you can survive after losing a major employer. Also, as I said, I'm the rep for Guilford Vernon, and I serve on the Natural Resources and Energy Committee in the House, which is a very appropriate committee for me to be on. So I look forward to moving forward with where we're going to go, and I've also had contact from the Speaker of the House asking for me to work with the folks on this panel, and Pat in particular and Chris, to develop what our needs are going to be from the legislature to move forward. So there has already been some very positive movement, and there has been a significant number of people that are saying the fight's over. It's time to recover. Let's move forward in a very positive fashion, and I hope this is the first evening towards that goal. Thank you.
Hello, I'm Olga Peters. I am the senior reporter with the Commons. And I want to thank everyone on the panel for coming tonight and everyone in the audience, since this is our first panel discussion like this on a very important issue. And as someone who has covered VY for the past 4 years, and also someone who had family who worked at Roe Yankee, and so saw the impacts of that plant closing down on a family's income. I think one thing to keep in mind, as some of the other panelists mentioned, is although it's really wonderful for us to learn from other towns that have had nuclear plants close, we have to remember that we're not exactly like them, and so our fate may not be exactly theirs. We have planning in place. We have, Vernon is located closer to other job markets than some of the other rural communities have been. And also, we, in mixed blessings, we had Tropical Storm Irene come through 2 years ago. And we proved to ourselves then that when everything falls apart, we still have what it takes to pull together and make something better happen. And so I think as much as there will be some very hard changes coming forward, especially for the people whose incomes will be impacted by the plant closing, I think we also have some opportunities as well. And it will be really interesting for me as a reporter to go forward and cover all that. So thank you for being here tonight.
Okay, so for the rest of the evening, the format is going to be as follows. I'll be asking the panelists some questions for about the next 20 minutes or so, and then we'll open it up to the audience. Your microphones here on the side so you can be heard, and so you can be heard on BCTV, who's also taping this forum tonight. So I'll start off with what probably is topic A all around New England, especially in places with nuclear plants. The front page of the Boston Globe today that had a story about Maine Yankee and their host town, Wiscasset, and how it's faring in the 2 decades or so since the plant closed. And it was the reporter who wrote the story for the Globe, David Abel, kind of hinted that this could be your fate, Vernon. And Ray, since you were there, you saw it, you lived through it, and as you were telling us before the forum, the only reason why you weren't in the story was an act of God.
It's true, it's true.
A lightning bolt that took out your answering machine. Here's your chance, Ray, to tell us what the Globe got wrong.
Yeah. What the Globe got wrong? Well, the Globe really didn't quantify the economic impacts. In particular, I guess they hit about 3 areas: a decline in business activity, tax increases, and I don't know, I suppose an overall fall in morale in the town. You have to realize that Maine Yankee closed, the decision to go into decommissioning was made in August of 1997. So this is, if they haven't recovered yet, this is a long time in recovery, and that's pretty serious business. The article points out, quoting someone, that taxes increased tenfold, and that's approximately correct. When Maine Yankee was operating, it provided about 95% of the town's tax revenue. So homes that at that point were being taxed $200 a year are now being taxed $2,000 a year, and that's big. But if you look at the region, you find that the tax rate in Wiscasset went from the bottom quartile for comparable taxes in the region to somewhere a little less than the 50% mark. So really, I live just across the river. Our taxes are quite high, and a lot of folks in the area can't help but smirk a little and say, this is real life, folks. This is what it's like when you don't have a tax milk cow in town.
Now in Vernon.
Well, I just want to comment that region-wide, the towns in the area, based on their valuation, contribute to county taxes. They supply the county taxes, and the tax burden for Wiscasset, the amount they pay into the county taxes, fell by about 5.5%. So that had to be absorbed. That burden had to be absorbed by the other 24 towns in the county. It isn't quite as bleak a picture as the Boston Globe would have it. It's more like the Boston Herald.
Representative Hebert, of course, in VY accounts for about 50% of the tax base of Vernon.
Right. At one point in time, it was approaching 90%. There's a great difference between our situation and that in Maine. One being, we've already seen a tenfold increase in our tax on the education side because of Act 60. When Act 60 came into play, for all intents and purposes, Entergy came off our grand list and went on the state grand list. So we've already had that kind of impact. We're looking at the impact on the town side. Also, it was not a 14-year early closure. We've had lead time. And I must say, I'm very thankful to folks like Irma Puffer, who was the person in Vernon that negotiated much of the Yankee contracts. At her insistence, the town did create capital funds and reserves. And for a number of years, we put them in for the inevitable time that BY would close. We would look to have a stable tax base for about a decade. Act 60 changed that somewhat on the school side. All the reserve funds are depleted. We have very minor reserves for building and maintenance, that sort of thing, but there's still a little bit on the town side. So it's significantly different. And also, the communities themselves are significantly different. We don't have our own high school. Maine Yankee, they have their own high school. So it's a different type of town. I think the impact will be different. It's going to be heartfelt. I think the main thing for us in Vernon is to diminish the panic as much as possible. We don't want our real estate values to go into free fall. And all of that will take planning and a calm position on where we're going with all of this. And I think the town itself has known for a number of years that this is what was going to happen eventually. So it is not a shocker to us. It will not be pleasant, but it's not a shocker. And we're hoping that many of the folks that reside in Vernon now are senior employees at the plant, long time invested in the community, been there 25, some of them 30 years. Their children are still in school or graduating school. Their mortgages are paid off. They very well may stay in town as a retirement home. So that's what we're looking for, to see how it all sugars out. And we don't know that this evening. We won't know that for another 18 months, because there will be people that will be retained at the plant until such time as the power goes off. And then there'll still be a security force and a crew to monitor the plant. So 18 months from now, we'll have a better idea what the picture is, but in between, we need to be planning.
So, Professor Nolan, you've had a chance to see both what happened in Rowe, what happened in Wisconsin. What do you think Vernon will avoid of the things that happened during the decommissioning process in the other two towns?
I think the big difference is that Vernon is realizing that it's not alone, and that in other places it really was a sense of loneliness. I don't think in the case of Yankee Row particularly that the region was prepared for it in resources or skills, but they are now. Nor do I think the state of Massachusetts leaped to the issue. And above all, that people didn't realize that this is not just a local problem, it's a national, federal problem. And in fact now, and I think that the plans that are in place are going to link those, and it's a fundamental difference. In other words, this is a federal, state, regional, local issue, and people do have to step up for it. And none of that was in place at Yankee Row. The other thing is the sense of isolation that you had at Yankee Row is quite different than what we have with Vernon. Vernon is part of, not quite a metropolitan area, but is indeed part of a larger context of communities that is inherently linked. Row is quite isolated. And so there are some fundamental differences. Above all, I think if you take a look at not only the closing of nuclear power plants, but closing of military bases and large things like mental hospitals, there's a whole context of lessons learned in terms of how to handle those things that wasn't there 20 years ago. So I think there is a different climate. There's much, and I will agree. There's much more climate of hope than I thought happened at Yankee Road.
But of course, for you, Pat, this is the ultimate plant closing. And I mean, BDCC's had to deal with things in the past, like the book press closing back in the 90s, or some of the other major employers in Brattleboro that left. But this is the ultimate plant closing problem for an organization like BDCC. And what are the strengths of this region compared to other regions that might make this transition not quite as harsh as it's been for other places?
Well, this is the ultimate plant closing, and Brattleboro and Windham County have been through them before, and as I said earlier, it's a marathon and not a sprint to recovery. And we have to look at continuing to diversify our economic base, continuing to look at entrepreneurial opportunities, continue to help our existing businesses grow, and we have a number of them that are growing. And I think that's one of the things that does differentiate this region. We are not isolated, as Professor Mullins says, in this neck of the woods. We're close to New Hampshire, we're close to Massachusetts. We share the economy of not just the Vermont region, but those two states. We're close to Hartford, we're close to Springfield, Massachusetts, we're close to Boston. Those are some pluses. We've also got a very robust, and I'm not sure everybody understands, the capability that we have in broadband and the other technology that is being deployed literally every day in this neck of the woods. And that's a huge asset that wasn't there at the time of a row closing or possibly even a Wiscasset. We also have a very robust existing business community and a very robust tourism economy with 2-3 arguably major ski areas in this neck of the woods and resources and assets that can leverage for us. There's a whole lot of people who come up here to go skiing every weekend or come up here to go hiking, and they are entrepreneurs themselves, they are potential investors, they are potential young people who may wish to move here and take these jobs. I think these are many of the assets that we talk about in the context of the comprehensive economic development strategy that we need to leverage regionally, and we need to keep in mind we are a region. Vernon is not alone, and Brattleboro is not alone, and we've already started initial conversations, need to do more with our friends in Massachusetts and New Hampshire about collaborating on how we're going to address this situation. And the fact that, you know, as Representative Hebert has said, I really hope that a lot of our VY employees say, you know, this isn't a bad place to live, and I want to stay here, and I want to figure out how I'm going to make a career or continue my career here. And I think there are many opportunities for us to do that.
Well, you have your foot in both these worlds, in the economic development and the nuclear world. And you know, one of the things we've talked about often in our office is the disparity between incomes in Windham County and the rest of Vermont and the rest of New England. And you kind of wonder, with some of the figures that we've heard in the past couple of weeks from the downtown action team about why this gap in income, and these were numbers that were taken before the announcement that VY was closing. What hope is there for a scenario like Pat just outlined, where, you know, those assets, the tourism economy, the existing economy here in Brattleboro can be leveraged enough to maybe pull some of the slack from VY?
Just to give folks context, when Randy's talking about numbers, Windham County has some of the lowest wages in Vermont and in New England. Compared to the average, give or take, salary at Vermont Yankee is around $100,000. And so it is a huge gap between a lot of the wages being earned at VY versus a lot of the jobs anyone could get in this area. And to add to the trouble, if you move just over the border to Keene or Northampton, Mass, you could very easily up your income by thousands. And so it can be a retention problem here. I think, as Randy asked about hope for the future, I think that's why it's so crucial that we have some of these economic development actions happening right now. is because Vermont Yankee closing may not necessarily cause any new economic problems, but it's going to definitely exacerbate what we already have as problems. And the other kind of issue that we run into in this region is we've got a number of towns with what I call mono-economies. So Vernon is set up a lot around Vermont Yankee. Wilmington and Dover, their economy is set up a lot around Mount Snow. And when you have a mono-economy, it's very hard for the economy to absorb big changes because there's less of a buffer. And so getting back to the economic strategies in the region, it's important, I think, that they're working on a regional level, and so that other towns, say Brattleboro and Wilmington, can work at attracting new businesses, new entrepreneurs, people who, one of the models, love to play at Mount Snow. Well, now make this your full-time life near the mountain, and you get to work where you can play, I think is the tagline. And so I think it will require a lot of work, but I do think it's a possibility that strategies like that can make a difference. I think it's also crucial, if you don't mind, Randy, if we turn it over to Professor Mullen for a minute, because I asked him earlier when we met, how does a region raise its incomes? How does it raise its wages? And I think that's a really important nut that we have to crack for this region.
I think there's, in the conversation we were having before, we were looking at the various types of communities, and there's two ways, in an absolute sense, of creating a dichotomy. These regions are places that make things, and then regions that go out and think about things. And making and thinking are two different things. And I wrote down some key words here in talking about this. On the making side, you have things like engineering and building and thank you, and enterprising and manufacturing. And on the thinking side, it's the teaching and the understanding and the nurturing and the comforting. And those words are all value laden, but they also define directions in which communities and regions go after some economic situation has occurred. It's up to you how you choose. If I go and I'm going to create something like I don't know, if I expand on the retreat, for example, I'm going to get one set of jobs there. You know, some of them are going to be high paying, but many of them are going to be less high paying. If I go into manufacturing, the multipliers is much higher. And what it says in communities, and clearly there has to be some balance here. What happens is communities will go out and say, okay, what is the easiest to get? And this is something that you have to be wary of. And the thing is, but over time, you build on those skill sets of making things and the engineering and those with the multipliers, and you'll see that your job base climbs. Your culture, changing your culture is very, very difficult. If you're, and you talked about Northampton and Amherst, where I'm from, we are comforting and we are nurturing, and we don't like to make things. We don't have a strong industrial base, and we're very happy with it. We're very happy with it. But the thing of it is, you have to decide a sense of direction, and trying to find that middle is not easy.
And I mean, Sebitz has defined and as Olga has identified, the wage disparity issue. And there are strategies that we are pursuing to address that. And a lot of it comes in that skill development piece. And to Dr. Mullen's point about making things. We make a lot of things here, and we want to make more things here. We've also identified that we have a large percentage of the population in this region that are non-wage earners. They're either retirees or living on transfer payments. We need to shift that. We need to have more people connected to the economy. We also need to have a higher skill level, and part of why I am here initially working on workforce is recognizing that we have a lot of employers here with good jobs who cannot find the talent. We have a lot of talent that do not have the skills. So connecting those dots and trying to figure out how we can, number one, fill in those skill gaps for our existing workforce, but number two, as we develop that pipeline of today's kids that are in the 4th grade and 8th grade and 10th grade, and help them understand the career opportunities that are here, and building career pathways that are very clear where they can launch either right into jobs. GS Precision is making a huge investment in an apprenticeship program because they recognize they can't find the talent and they're willing to grow it here. We need to do more of that. And the fact that we have 6 colleges in this region is a huge asset. And I would argue some of the wage disparity is because there are a lot of thinkers down in Northampton, and we want to be the makers as well as the thinkers through the colleges. So these are all elements that are going to come together to slowly raise those wages for our region. But we need to do it faster, clearly.
And then there's the 800-pound elephant in the room, and that is that when the plant, if it happens, what's going to happen once that day comes in the fall with the lights out, parties over, start cooling down things and start pulling out the fuel rods? Which direction is it going to go? Safe store? Or the one that sounds like rat poison, decon? Chris, you've been working on this with Wyndham Regional. I'll get to you next, Ray, on this, because you certainly have some opinions on that, on both those things. Chris? Wyndham Regional seems to think that the worst thing that could possibly happen to the Wyndham County economy would be to have that place tied up for 60 years where you can't do anything with it.
Mm-hmm. Well, I mean, decon certainly represents the softer landing. If you look at, so what we rely on, just so you know, are Entergy zone filings within the Public Service Board docket. We're not, what they say is going to happen when they close. And by their own information that they provided, the estimate is that within, I think it's 9 to 12 months of closing, they'll drop from approximately 620 employees to about 250. Now, and then that'll gradually taper off. But if you go to the immediate decommissioning, the employment levels at that during that phase, which could be like 5 to 7 years, it ramps back up to 300. Now, if you defer that, if you go straight on into Safe Store, you're looking at about 50 to 60 people working at the site, mainly security. And so the softer landing would be decon. And if you read the Connecticut Yankee closure website, if you read the Maine Yankee report, if you look at the United Nations Nuclear Organization, lots of, I think even the old industry documents, the preferred industry method was decon, immediate decommissioning, because in part, you're able to retain those legacy employees, the people who know that plant, like the unique organism that it is, and they can actually assist with the dismantlement. Under Safe Store, you lose those legacy employees. And so our issue is, our suggestion is that decon is in the best interest of the region because it would represent the softer landing, fiscally, economically, real estate-wise, virtually all the different impacts that have already been discussed. And the other issue, but of course what Yankee has said they're going to do from the outset is Safe Store. And so that's why we're trying to participate in the Public Service Board process to say, we've never said the plant should stay open or closed, but we've said from the outset, based on their own information they provided us, immediate decommissioning is the best option.
Right.
Mm-hmm. What kind of leverage does anyone have to make the process move toward a closure of the plant that would serve everyone's needs in terms of not tying it up for 60 years, being able to get it to greenfield status as soon as possible so there's another use for it? Are we locked into whatever Entergy says right now?
It's kind of a preloaded question, isn't it?
Well, I guess it is.
The entire question of decommissioning and economic recovery and all of the impacts that come with closing a plant are too big not to be made in concert with all of the interested parties. There's a process that worked for us very well in Maine, and that was to identify what our common interest was broadly, You know, it could be everyone is very interested in a timely, quality decommissioning. But, you know, we run into a few problems when it comes to defining what timely is, and what quality is. You know, what standard will this plant be cleaned up? The Connecticut Yankee, Maine Yankee, Yankee Row were all cleaned up to a radiological cleanup standard 2.5 times more strict than what the federal government allows. Do, you know, Vermont residents, the Vermont environment deserve less? I don't know. That's a question that you have to come to. If you, the company is always making business decisions. The Maine Yankee chose, and by the way, with Entergy management, chose to go to prompt decommissioning, to the decon option, because it was, in the long run, cheaper and more efficient. More efficient in part because of what Chris brought up about having employees there that were there when the plant was built. They know how to build it, they know how to take it apart, they know it was modified, they know where the contamination is, so you don't have to go exploring for it. There were huge cost savings that came from involving those employees. So this is all really part of being able to change your view. You know, there are no enemies here. There are opponents. You can sit down at table, you can break bread with your opponents and discuss what concerns you have in common. I think, personally, that choosing the safe store option with the idea that the company is going to make a lot of money over 60 years on its invested funds is another bad business decision on the part of Entergy. And I can't wait when we have the opportunity to be able to talk with them about that.
How do you think Entergy could improve communication with the town and with the region? Because, I mean, a lot of this is going to depend on a good two-way dialogue with Entergy and the towns and the region and the state and the feds.
Let me comment on that quickly, if I may, okay? You know, I represent the opposition in terms of Entergy's continued operation or operation of business as usual. We fought the environmental issues, and I've never had a problem sitting down and negotiating with Entergy Corporation. You know, the breaks during the Public Service Board hearings, and we would get together and talk shop. And I think that it really has to be at that level. There's a certain mutual respect that needs to be developed, and then the identification of common interests. And I think that the companies have to be educated to this. I think we did that job in Maine of educating Maine Yankee and its Entergy managers to the notion that they were in a very green state in one of the greenest parts of the country, and we had to have some environmental adjustment there. So anyway, I think the burden is not Entergy's. I think largely the burden is with the affected population.
Would you agree with that, Mike?
To some extent, yes, I do. But I think the relationship between Vernon and Entergy has always been good, as I said earlier, and we've never had difficulty negotiating with them. I think what may have contaminated the environment, so to speak, is that rather than negotiating over a number of years, we've been litigating. And my concern here is whether it's decon or safe store, it needs to be a negotiated item, and we need to stop litigating. It's time to really negotiate, not litigate. And my concern is that they're going to come to loggerheads, the state and Entergy, and we're going to be in court again trying to decide which way we're going to go. I would much prefer a negotiated settlement. As Ray indicated, we're both parties can sit down, or all the parties involved can sit down and say, look, this is in our best interest. We have common goals and common needs. One of my greater concerns is the failure of the federal government to have a facility to take the waste from the plant. As long as dry cask storage is there, the use of that land will be limited. You're going to have perimeter fence, you're going to have a security force. So I have great concerns with that. I'm probably less optimistic about the Fed moving forward than I am our region, the state, and Entergy moving forward to a common goal.
If I might, Randy, too, we've already started a dialogue with the local management with Entergy around concerns about workforce and how can we assess, if you will, what kind of talent we have there, what kind of credentials, education, security clearances, et cetera, and talking with them about what are we doing with SEVEDS and what is the SEDS, what are the strategies, and we want to keep that dialogue open and really basically saying what's past is past. What needs to happen now is we need to talk about the future and how we're going to move forward together. But for Representative Hebert's point about the whole decommissioning discussion, but I get the sense they're expecting that to be a discussion, and I would tend to agree a negotiated settlement would be a whole lot better on everyone's, to everyone's benefit. But thus far, we've already had a pretty good dialogue with them, and we'll continue that.
Let's see if we can have a good dialogue in here. Now it's time for your questions. So if you have them, please go to the microphones off the side of the room and identify who you'd like to ask the question to, and they'll have a couple of minutes to respond. Go ahead.
Hi there. Thanks everyone for doing this.
Identify yourself.
Yes, my name is Chad Simmons. I live here in Brattleboro. I've actually been thinking about this question for a couple of weeks now, what I would ask. It's been touched on a little bit, but I wanted to put it in the language of social justice rather than economics. And I think while I agree in part, Pat, about the idea of moving forward, I think it's important to understand the context in which a lot of these decisions are being made in. And so my question is, how do we move forward in order to achieve justice, in order to achieve the values that are reflected in this room, in this community? And I think the professor spoke about it a little bit in terms of the values-based or value-laden language. And I think it's really important for us to answer or ask those questions first before we say, how do we replace the jobs? How do we bring in more money to our economy? And we ask ourselves, what is it that we actually want? What kind of a community do we want? What's going to build resiliency? What's going to build community? And so talking about it in the terms of justice rather than jobs or and only economy and only money, because what happens then is you have this. So I guess my question is actually, how do we create that conversation? How do we talk about these issues in the form of justice rather than jobs and money?
It's an interesting question. I mean, I think we've been having the conversation for a while about what do we want our community, what do I want our region to look like, kind of what do we want to be when we grow up. I mean, that's really what the regional forums and other conversations we've been having around the SEDS and around SEVEDS has been all about. And participation has been pretty good regionally, and we've found some interesting differences around the region about expectations and wants, but I think clearly the message is we want a good economic future for ourselves and for our families. We want economic stability. We want higher wages, lower taxes, lower cost of living, good quality of life, clean environment, healthy. We want all the things that we are enjoying to some degree, but want more of that. So, I mean, it's an interesting point on the justice question. I guess I would defer to Professor Mullen or anyone.
Olga jump on this one.
I mean, and I just want to piggyback too. I mean, I think Olga brings up the point of the survival of Tropical Storm Irene and how we did come together as a region and a community, and this is another one of those marathon sprint type opportunities where it's yet another opportunity for us to have that conversation about how we're going to collaborate and find a way to be better than we were.
Thank you. This might be slightly off topic, but it's something that, as someone who covers economics, I feel rather passionate about. So I'm going to bring it up, is that I think one of the things about discussions moving forward, economics, jobs, social justice, welfare, is I think we need a slight shift in perspective in the way we approach the discussion in general. I think often we approach the discussion of, okay, well, if we talk about economics, it's all about money. If we talk about social justice, then that's something else. And what it is that I don't think we should be operating from the assumption that they are two different things. Because economics is about how we use our resources. And how we use our resources depends on our priorities. And our priorities come from our hopes and our dreams and our desires and what we want our community to be. And so I think going forward, that's kind of part of what we need to drop, is assuming that it's either going to be social justice or economics. It's going to be good jobs or everyone will have a job. And it is also why I come back to why we need a diverse economy, so that there is room for everybody. There's rooms for the artists, there's rooms for the manufacturing, there's room for everybody across the spectrum. So that's my soapbox. I will get off it now.
Chris can jump on it.
So two things on the social justice side of the equation. One of the things that I hope will happen as we continue with this, I mean, the SEVIS process has been very good. It has been region-wide. One of the challenges has been actually getting more people to participate and actually engage in the conversation who, frankly, are wage and salary dependent. And so hopefully the Commons, the Reformer, everybody in this room will encourage people to engage in that conversation, because oftentimes it's been organizations or, I mean, we've been talking about, so I'm a former community organizer myself, and my task was to engage the people, not anybody we were to find ourselves talking about. We realized those are the folk who need to be in the room speaking for themselves. And that's a challenge in this region, because frankly, I've never been in a place where economic need, economic sustainability has been so little talked about. We seem to have a lot of other priorities. And that has got to become more at the fore, just to actually, because, you know, Vermont's employment rate's relatively low, but I suspect that's because when you lose your job, you leave. And so that's what makes us look good relative to other places. We need to come up with it, figure out the dynamic where people can stay who want to stay. We can age in place here. And you're not here because you can afford to be here. You're here because the economy can actually support you. I want to get real quick to the social justice issue on the decommissioning discussion. Folk need to understand that under the NRC rules, basically the plant has the ability to decide how it's going to close. And so what everybody said here is right. There needs to be a conversation, an open conversation between the community and Entergy, and hopefully have a meeting of the minds about what is in our communities, all of our communities' best interest. And there may need to be a national conversation, or actually there probably has to be, and we can help lead this. There are 5 plants that have announced they're either, that have either closed or announced they're going to close, 5 reactors rather. 2 in San Onofre, Kewanee in Wisconsin, Duke Energy in Crystal River, and then Entergy Nuclear Vermont Yankee. And there are expected to be a number of other of this older generation plant closing. I don't know that when the Nuclear Regulatory Commission wrote the rules that they're anticipating a slew of plants closing and possibly going to the safe store for 60 to 80 years as decommissioning funds grow, as that makes these corporations look more cash positive, as smaller subsidiaries are responsible, are left holding the bag for eventually decommissioning a plant, and the operators themselves actually owning their own decommissioning companies. And so does this become a discussion about what's in the best interest of the host community where the plants are, or does it become more of an issue, a discussion around what is in the best interest of the corporate finance to kind of cycle the money back into the parent corporation? And so there probably needs to be a national policy discussion about what's in the best interest, without even getting into health, safety, and welfare. What's in the best interest of the local communities? What kind of input can and should they have just simply for orderly redevelopment of what are oftentimes very valuable industrial properties. And just actually giving the communities access. Right now, once the plant comes up with a plan, you have a couple of public hearings. That's all they're required to do. And so there's a social justice element to that, and that hopefully Entergy will recognize the need to have that conversation, because what they decide to do here is probably what they're going to decide to do at Pilgrim and Indian Point, and frankly, the whole industry probably needs to become aware of what, how they're going to deal with this, and we need to have a national policy conversation about what's in the best interest of the nation.
You've been patient?
Yeah, my name is Harvey Shackman. I have one suggestion if you
Yes.
consider, and then one question. And my suggestion is that how about seeding the territory and considering the Entergy's headquarters up on Old Ferry Road, that as essentially a facility that will be available, and also an extremely skilled engineering workforce that already exists. Encourage Entergy to convert their headquarters into some kind of a sustainable energy, green energy kind of a discovery center, or developing new kinds of forms of safe, green, non-nuclear energy. That's one consideration. And my question is, what I'm hearing is you're assuming that there's a process of negotiation that will take place, as if the regulations that exist now allow a community to have something to say about what the corporation is going to do with the site. My sense is, and I may be wrong, is the NRC lets them, they can go into decommissioning, in which they have to submit a plan, it has to be approved, etc. Or they go into safe storage, and they can pick the length of time. And those are two options that are, my instinct, legally available to them right now. And I don't think the community has anything to say about that. Now, tell me if I'm wrong, because that would help.
I'll attempt to speak to this. We're optimistic that you can, and we've always been able to negotiate things with Vermont Yankee, whether it's our tax base or several other items that we've dealt with them. You're certainly correct. They do have the option of what they want to do. So it's up to us to take the steps to approach them saying, this is what is in the best interest of our community. And the folks in control and power of the VY plant down in Louisiana have already stated that they want to go out with their heads held high and do it in a proper fashion. So we're going to call them on that and say, this is what we need to have happen, whether it's retaining employees, the things we'd like to see happen. And I think that's what we have to work with.
So there's no power in that.
We don't have a lot of power, but what we will rely heavily upon is our past relationship and their desire to maintain somewhat of a
This is
positive.
also a corporation that has fought the state of Vermont time and time again, and lied under oath. I mean, if you're very optimistic, and I know it would be good to go in with a positive attitude, but I think historically, we see a different kind of behavior from this corporation.
As I've said earlier, it's time to not fight the old battles. It's time to move forward in a positive fashion. And you may believe they lied, you may believe they've been dishonest. It's a moot point now. It's a new day, we have to move forward, and from our position, we need to take the most optimistic position possible. And that is that we will hold them to the standard that they've said they're going to leave with, and apply whatever pressure we can, because the reputation they leave with here will carry to their other plants throughout the fleet. And if they leave here with a big black eye, it's not going to bode well for them in other communities either. So we do have, if nothing else, a PR lever. But legally, we don't have a lot to stand on.
Yes, sir.
I'm Leo Schiff from Brattleboro, from the Safe and Green organization. And my question is really for all the panelists. I'm not convinced that this Civil War is really over. It would be nice if it were, but I think that the interests of the community and the corporation really diverge in terms of Safe Store versus decommissioning. And what I want to know, is there any panelist here, and I look to you the most, Mike, who will not fight vigorously for the decommissioning option?
Well, first of all, what I would have to do is ascertain what Vernon wants to do as a community. We're talking about that and meeting about that over the next several weeks. In fact, I'm meeting tomorrow with some VY folks to talk about where we'd like to go. And certainly there are different options to be taken. If you look at Safe Store, you know, maybe, I'm not sure financially if the plant's there, we may get a little more property tax. I'm not sure how all that plays out. I think we do need to study that situation a little more. But the bottom line is, do I really want a situation where it's my great-grandchildren that are decommissioning the plant? I'm not sure I want to go there. But at this point in time, I can't say what is the better option for Vernon. But I do want what will be in the best interest of Vernon. And if it's decided that it is decommissioning, then that is the way I will go. I am the representative for Guilford and Vernon. If that is the best outcome for Vernon, that's what I'll represent.
Even if it doesn't dovetail with the interests of the rest of the region?
Well, I'm not sure if it would or wouldn't. I mean, as we've said, Vernon is not an island. I mean, we exist within the region. So when I say it's in the interest of the community, I'm talking the broader community. So it's going to be, yes, Vernon's going to have some goals and objectives. You know, we would like the softest landing possible, but also we need to be looking at what is in the total best interest of the area.
How about the other panelists, starting with the professor?
Thank you very much. Your question is really a good one, and it's very heavily value laden. But the first question is deciding what is the appropriate level of decision making. Is it the town? Is it the region? Is it the state? Is the fact that 300 workers live in Massachusetts who have a stake in this? And that is something that is clearly in the realm of the political leaders here. They have to decide what it is. Sometimes you can come into projects and you decide on too small a scale, and you get in trouble. Sometimes you get too large and you miss the fact that tons of people are impacted severely. There is no one-size-fits-all, and I applaud the response of the representative that says, look, we all know about no new tax pledges. Right? I don't think asking this panel to come in and choose now is the appropriate manner. The first thing is to get the appropriate scale, then to get the appropriate intensity, and at that point you can go forward. I've seen too often when things like this are done in a vacuum, and the help that these communities should have was not forthcoming. So this is something that has to be done very, very carefully, in a very transparent way, in a way in which those people impacted really do have a say.
If I can jump in here, before the talk tonight, you were discussing about a possibility of using Vernon as a test case for the rest of the country that's going to be facing this problem in other towns with shutting down their aging reactors.
At UMass, we have the phrase, "If I ran the zoo, what would we do?" And in this case here, if I was in charge, the very first thing I would do is I would get a list. I would call a national conference here in Brattleboro of every nuke across the United States. Those that are closed, those that are closing, and those that are there, to find the best practices, the weakest parts of it, and have this put on your NPR station. Have your senators and your rep here, and the goal of it would be to get this on our national agenda very, very quickly. You know, we have something called the Office of Economic Adjustment, which covers base closings. Why can't the Office of Economic Adjustment look at nukes? And the framework's all there. And the thing of it is that it shouldn't be the burden of Vernon, the county, or the state. And the fact is, you all have a cost in this, but so does the Fed, and so does the company. And having this conference, and having it come out, and the idea of creating a manual of best practices is clearly it's time. Rather than having these single people going out and saying, I've gone to Maine, and this is what happened in Maine. I've gone to Connecticut. It's time that we get a playbook here in terms of the art of the possible.
One thing related to that, the reason we may be at a bit of the tip of the spear, because I'm not sure to what extent other communities have actually looked into what the options are going to be now that your plant's now since closed. Because looking at Press and other, not so much Florida, because they already have a safe store reactor, because that's a multi-reactor complex. There's a coal facility on that site too. But Kewanee, Wisconsin, that took them by surprise. And there may be other communities that really haven't. Vernon commissioned us to develop a resiliency plan for them for when they close. I'm not sure to what extent that's happened nationally. And what John's suggesting, I think, is a very valid strategy, because we really do need to have a national conversation about what the implications are when your plan announces it closes. If communities realize how officially under beyond the negotiations, the informal negotiations, how much authority they really have, how much input they're authorized to have in this process, I think they would be shocked. And the context has changed now. Again, I suspect, I wasn't there, but I suspect when the rules were drafted, they were thinking a plant would close periodically, every once in a while. And now we could be looking at, I don't know how many, maybe, I don't know how many we're looking at, realistically closing of this generation because of the gas prices putting them at an economic disadvantage. But it's not a small number. And to me, this has profound national, local policy implications. So, I think Vermont leading that discussion would be a really good idea.
To your question, Leo, I would just remind folks that CEVITS did have a post-VY committee that developed a report and went on the record in support of a full dismantling and decommissioning of the plant. I too agree with the case study approach and really feel we have an opportunity here to really study and look at the implementation of the strategies and activities that we're going to undertake and really determine what works, what doesn't work in rural areas. And I do think there's an opportunity for conversation with Entergy to say this is not going to be your first rodeo, or your last rodeo rather. So chance for you to work collaboratively with us to figure out how you go out on the white horse and not the dark horse. And the vibe I'm getting thus far is a willingness for that conversation. But we need the kind of conference that John is suggesting. 5 nuclear power plants already announced is a lot. Again, I'll go to analogy of Tropical Storm Irene. FEMA learned a lot when they came to Vermont, and they've changed some of their practices. We have organizations like the Small Business Development Center here in Vermont that wrote a pre- and post-disaster planning book where none existed before. That is now being used heavily in Colorado and in New Jersey and New York Hurricane Sandy. So we have a similar opportunity to lead in this area. So I love the idea when you put it on the table, John. I do think whether it's a conference or whether it's an opportunity for us to be a case study, a test case, with or without Entergy, frankly, we have an opportunity to do that and to have a national conversation about the fact that this is a base closing, only it's different. We don't have the asset of the buildings and the land that any kind of military base leaves behind, which gives us an even greater challenge. And it is time to engage with the NRC and others about what are we doing about this, folks, because this is not going to be the last time this nation confronts this issue.
Mr. Chavez?
I'd just like to briefly address the questions from the 2 last questioners. One, on the matter of how do you bring the company to the table? How do you get there, get that dialogue going? I would just say litigation. I love it. Well, here's what. Here's what. Everyone is under oath. Every positive offering really needs to be backed with evidence. The company itself is open, as it is never open in any other ordinary public venue, because, of course, of discovery, where you can look at the documents and say, yes, what are your calculations for how the plant is going to be maintained over these many years? You really get to look at that. So that's one. And of course, the litigation is the perfect venue for sitting down and talking turkey about stuff. That little coercive factor is there, and it's important. With respect to social justice, I was really pleased to hear Mike say, you know, he had concerns about his grandchildren having to take care of decommissioning. It's an issue that we're bringing before the Vermont Public Service Board, and it's a thing called intergenerational equity. Okay, you got people being born 60 years down the road that have never seen a kilowatt out of this plant or a tax penny, and they are going to be asked at that point to assume the burden of securing this waste. The U.S. Nuclear Regulatory Commission, the federal court said, plainly doesn't have a plan other than wishful thinking for what to do with the waste. So, you know, these are big issues. There's not enough time. I speak too slowly, too convoluted to passion, but these kinds of issues really need to be thought about. They need to be dredged up from our best instincts and brought to play on the questions surrounding this decommissioning, the environmental effects, the whole of it. One last quick. In 2001, the Keystone Foundation sponsored a national dialogue on decommissioning. We had, and I was asked to participate, we had about 20 or 30 environmentalists from around the country. We had about 50 industry people, and we had about 50 regulators from around the country to talk about decommissioning. It turned out that the basic question was who's going to pay for it. And when we got down to that, the dialogue broke down.
Your federal tax dollars will work.
The benefactors, the funders withdrew their money in a matter of a lunch hour. It was over. So good luck. I do think that the prospect of the communities that are affected getting together and looking at what they have in common, what their concerns are in common, and then investigating what avenues for redress they have. You know, how can we get this problem addressed? I think that could be productive. Thank you.
Vermont's luck with litigation hasn't been too good lately, and I think Representative Hebert might speak to that, and also just that what leverage the state might have. I've heard the suggestion that, you know, make a deal. We won't tax the dry casks at 200% if you go to decon rather than safe store. We'll you know, there's a little bit of horse trading going on over the various things the state is doing now to the plant.
You know, the Public Service Board process is still open.
Yes, it is.
Litigation has not ended, and
that's
docket 7862 and frankly docket 7600 about the leaks are still open, and Entergy requested on the day they announced their closure, they amended their petition to the Public Service Board. So they seem to recognize that they still need a certificate of public good to continue operating. They're asking, I believe it's through December 2014. Mm-hmm. So one of the things that Ray was talking about, that the reason why we know what the intent of Entergy Nuclear Vermont Yankee is when they close is because of the information they provided through the dockets. Other states don't have that. They probably have no earthly idea what Dominion or Duke or other companies are planning to do. The only reason we know is because of the CPG process. Now, you've also got the decommissioning plans that they submit to the NRC, the spent nuclear fuel plans, but it's through the docket that we could actually ask their witnesses, tell us what you're going to do. And so there's been real value in that. The reason I was shaking my head when they said let's continue with litigation is we can't. I mean, we've been doing it with no resources whatsoever. It's a hell of a way to run a regulatory process when basically you have to rely on volunteers to participate representing the region's interests. But so how the CPG will proceed, how the Public Service Board is going to, there's going to be we're going to have a status conference on October 1st, and I guess we'll find out. And reply briefs are still due, I believe it's October 12th.
But when the legislature convenes in January, is there any, are there any plans for coming up with a state plan for dealing with the closure?
Well, in my committee, there has been discussion about green fields, things like that. So there will be some legislation filed along those lines, which would set the stage for immediate decommission. So that sets the stage for either we negotiate or litigate. One of the reasons I'm not a big fan of litigation is it's cost the state a whole lot of money, and we've had very little success. So I think we need to explore other options first and work cooperatively as much as we can with Entergy to come up with a solution that works for all of us. And again, this evening is very early in the process. There's a lot for us to digest. There's a lot for us to study and say, what is it we really want to do? The questions this evening, very broad. What is it we want to do? I don't know how many people in the room here, quite a few, and I'll bet you as a room full of attorneys, everyone's got their own opinion. So we've got to come together with a like mind before we can decide we want to litigate, we want to negotiate. It's a long process, and I think Pat alluded to it's not a sprint. It's a long distance race.
Hi, I'm Alyssa Weinman. This question's mainly for Ray Shaddis, but I'm sure everybody else will have comments on it. And it goes back to that issue of just accepting that Entergy calls the shots when it comes to how they choose to decommission. And well, the NRC rule says that's what the NRC's rule says, but we can influence the NRC rules as citizens. And we can also, when you talk about the national policy, you know, the rules regarding radioactive waste are being rewritten right now. Senate is writing a bill on national nuclear waste policy. Sanders is on the committee. There's lots of ways to, as citizens, that we don't just have to roll over and accept what the corporation says we should do. We can rewrite the rules. We can rewrite how we're going to deal with this national problem. So my question is, Ray, I mean, really, what can we do? I mean, the courts have closed down the NRC's ability to license or relicense any new reactors. So the industry has to do something because nuclear power has basically been shut down until we can decide what to do with the waste, what to do with the spent fuel pools. All of this is in play right now. So when we say we're just going to, you know, sort of accept what Entergy wants to do and tell us what to do, I would say the citizens have a unique opportunity at this confluence in time to influence the process, both at the rulemaking at the NRC and on the federal level. So I would like your opinion on that, Mr. Shaddis.
When the nuclear industry was first rolled out, with congressional approval, the industry complained because many states wanted to institute their own rules, their own regulations for radiological releases, for all the rest of it. They said they could not conceivably comply with 48 or 50 different sets of rules, and so the concept of federal preemption over nuclear regulation was born. The states said, what about our rights to be represented in this process? And the trade-off was a whole series of hearing rights. When a plant decides that it's going to decommission, they issue to NRC a permanently defueled certificate, roughly what it's called. And then within a certain period after that, they have to put together a post-shutdown decommissioning activities report. That releases a little bit of funds to them. And then they have to provide what's called a license termination plan. This basically lays out exactly how they are going to proceed with testing the site for radiological materials, for cleaning it up, for taking care of the buildings and so on. Every radiological aspect has to be in a license termination plan. Each of these steps is an opportunity for the citizenry to intervene. It's not litigation we go seeking, but it is litigation that is brought to us. The company's application itself is an invitation to litigation. At Maine Yankee, when we citizens attempted to intervene, the U.S. Nuclear Regulatory Commission staff opposed it, and they came up with a raft of objections to our intervention. Maine Yankee Atomic Power Company filed on our side and said, you ought to let them intervene, you're being a little overly legalistic. Surprise, surprise, we had already established dialogue with them. And they were open to it. Maybe to their error, because then, of course, we used it for leverage to get to the bargaining table. I think we all kind of knew what the plan was. In the case of Vermont Yankee, it's not our choice, particularly, to seek litigation before the Vermont Public Service Board, but Vermont Yankee said, give us a permit for a CPG for 1 year instead of 20, unconditional. We think it needs to be conditioned. We think it needs to be conditioned on a prompt quality decommissioning. And that's what we're going to go in and litigate on. Yes. The Public Service Board has routinely conditioned certificates of public good. And, you know, we're going to go into treading into preemption waters, and there's going to be a fight. We don't see any other way to get there, but we're always willing to talk. So I kind of needed to clarify that. Thank you.
Well, so what have we learned today? I'll go around the panel and have them throw in their final thoughts. You, Chris.
Oh, thanks. Trying to go with me. My final thoughts. Yeah, so I mean, I do hope we've reached out to Entergy. Basically, we were told can't really talk yet. But hopefully that line of dialogue will continue. It's good they're talking to BDCC and CEVEDS about the job site. It's absolutely essential that they're talking to Vernon. But we've got other larger regional plan issues. Maybe they're a little hesitant to talk because we are a party in the PSP process. But hopefully there'll be a better flow of communication. I do want folks to know that I have reached out to our counterparts in New Hampshire and Mass. We are working together. I'm going to be going down to talk to the board of the Franklin County Council of Governments, because this does affect not just Vermont, but you know, it's a major impact on Hinsdale, major impact on the communities in Massachusetts. So there is an opportunity that comes out of this where we start talking about our economic opportunities moving forward together, because we are inherently interrelated. You just look at the license plates going down the streets. So hopefully this will be an opportunity to kind of talk beyond the artificial boundaries of the state lines and really start working together more. I just want to bring up that other possible silver lining.
I just want to thank the Commons again for this forum tonight. Also, belated thank you, Mike, for your great comments. But I take no credit. This is going to require all of us to pull together, continue to work as a region, region, both within Vermont and within Vermont, Massachusetts, and New Hampshire, on finding solutions together. But the good news is we are sitting where we have a plan. We have been working on an economic development strategy for a while. We're nearing its completion. You'll hear that that process has been delayed a bit to incorporate the known date of a VY closing and what strategies we might want to be looking at around workforce. And we recognize that the urgency has been ratcheted up big time. The volume's been cranked up. We need to get going. So, but it's going to take time. You don't turn an economy on a dime. You don't turn it overnight. Economic development isn't a process whereby you flip the light on and woo, problems are solved. But it's a process where you flip the light on and start the conversation, and we've been in that for a while. So we defer to the Wyndham Regional, who's been engaged big time for a long time on the whole question of decommissioning. They have the expertise. They know the process. We want to support them. But we will continue the dialogue about how do we recover our regional economy and how can we keep as many as the people, the good people who are employed at VY here, gainfully employed, and pursuing the quality of life that they want to. So thank you again.
I have a couple of points. One, I think that the dialogue clearly has to get to the national level, well beyond what's going on here. And with that should come federal funds. And I think it's not just your issue, and sometimes I worry about Vermont because you look inward so much. But this is one time that I think that you've got to look national and outward. I applaud very much the work that Pat and the SEDS team has done. I think it's the right way to go. And I would urge strongly, by the way, that you might even consider putting that conference as one of your items in the SEDS. That Vermont shouldn't have to pay for this. I think it's something that people could gain from. And if the University of Vermont doesn't want to help, UMass will. No self-interest. I just throw that right out there. And then I think also in this is the issue, the toughest of all, and that's the notion of transparency. And transparency and trust. And that comes back to social justice. But the point of it is that this has to be done in a way that is understood. And I worry about that all the time. I hear these acronyms out here. I'm president of the AAL, the Anti-Acronym League. And I hear these acronyms floating back and forth up here. And I said, good gosh, I'm supposed to know these things. And what would a lay citizen think? But somehow this transparency and understanding the process and where I, as a homeowner or investor, fit is absolutely crucial at every step of the way. So those are my thoughts.
In 2001, 5 years into decommissioning Maine Yankee, we undertook a little economic study of the consequences, looking particularly at the effect on the economy. We looked at every economic indicator we could find for the area of the tri-county area around Maine Yankee. And what we found is once we got outside the host town, over that 5-year stretch, we could really find no economic bumps. It may be that one contributing factor was that the workers came from a radius of about 50 miles commuting to the plant. Similar to your situation here, where you have workers coming from the tri-state area. Whatever economic multipliers you may have, one job at Vermont Yankee equals 1.8 jobs out there somewhere. You're going to have a hard time finding them. Never mind fixing it, addressing it, patching it up. I think a large part of that is going to come from the vibrancy, the resiliency of the economy that's out there. I hope that's a helpful kind of thing for you. The state's economist at the time, Charles Colgan, found similarly that there were very, very small economic impacts outside the immediate area. And he said that a large part of that had to do with the fact that that atomic power plants or nuclear power plants are really economic islands. They order exotic parts from far, far away. They get very little down at the local trustworthy hardware store. And that's kind of what showed up in Maine. I would say that take some comfort in that. Expect the worst, plan for the worst, do your best in terms of trying to patch up an economy you anticipate is going to be, hit with a deadly slug. But our experience is that's not what happened.
Well, also, I'd like to thank everyone for showing up this evening to have this forum. I think there's been a lot of important ideas expressed, some concerns expressed, but I do think that for the most part, we here at the table are fairly hopeful that we're going to progress forward, in little ways, and hopefully those little ways will add up, and in the long run, we'll have the recovery that we desire. One of the smaller bright lights at this moment is there is a local company who's been trying to attract exactly the type of person that works at Vermont Yankee. They've been trying to attract nuclear engineers and those types of folks. So they will have some people to hire, and they have a significant number of jobs. So that's a positive, and it's a first step forward. As for the town of Vernon,
What company? Who are you talking about, Mike?
It's Robotics of Vermont. I don't know if people are familiar with them.
Right.
Okay. They are in the process of negotiating international contracts and are anticipating within the next 2 or 3 years to either double or triple in size. And this is a company for a high school graduate going to work for them who has some reasonable skills, math and science-wise, can start out at somewhere in the neighborhood of $52,000. I don't think we have a lot of employers that take kids out of UHS and will pay them that much money, or from the Career Center. So that's a very positive thing. And I think the more that we look for those types of opportunities, the better off we'll be. And that'll require that we keep the dialogue open. Whether you're pro-nuke, anti-nuke, you want nuclear energy to continue, you'd like to see it stop, is irrelevant. The issue is we need to move forward economically, and I personally think as far as social justice, you cannot really achieve social justice if you don't have a strong economy. I spent the morning with the Hunger Council, and we looked at some of the statistics for our local schools, and most of the schools in Windham County are over 50% on the poverty level, free and reduced lunch. Vernon, luckily, is way under that. Hopefully that doesn't change dramatically with the closing of Yankee. But certainly, those are the things that when you look at social justice, you have to say, how can we better that? And one of the ways to better that is to have a stronger economy where you can send more resources to the people in need. So again, I'd like to close on a hopeful note, at least from my standpoint. 30 years I've had a good working relationship with folks at VY. I'm going to hold them to their word of leaving on that white horse, that they're going to leave in the proper fashion. I'm not going to commit to either decommissioning or safe store until we come to a determination as a community as to where we want to be. But certainly the standard of leaving in the appropriate fashion, we all have to hold them to that standard. And they've put the standard out there themselves, so I don't think there's any reason for us not to call them on it. And again, thank you for this evening. It's been great. Randy, Leah, Chris, thank you.
Yes, thanks everyone for turning out tonight. As a reporter who's in print, so often we put stories out and we don't always know who's reading or the impact they're having. So it's wonderful to see everyone out here tonight and to hear the panelists' views on the issue. I think for me, my takeaway is Yes, the Civil War is not quite over. Case in point, right after Entergy announced its closing, I bumped into family members who said it was my fault. The plant stayed open as long as it did because I'm a journalist. And I met family members who felt that it was my fault the plant had closed because I'm a journalist. So we do have some of our own muck to clean up in our community, since this has been an over 40-year discussion, and at times a very heated one. But we're also at the opportunity where we can make this next transition what we want it to be. There's a lot out of our control in many respects, the NRC, what goes on at the federal level, Entergy's decisions, but there's still a lot in our control. And I don't think we should ever underestimate, and again I say this as a journalist, we should never underestimate the power of holding people accountable. And as Mike said, Entergy has kind of set their own standard, and so now we hold them accountable to that. Thank you.
And the last word tonight for this evening will go to Jeff Potter, our editor, who would like to offer a few words about why this event came about and what it will take to have future events just like this one.
Thanks, Randy. I gotta say that this is something that I have fantasized about having, bring the Voices section into a theater with actual people here instead of a harried editor upstairs 2 or 3 floors working at 3 a.m. There's no interactivity, at least not as much as I'd like, and it's so great to see all of you here. And I hope this isn't the end, but the beginning. I would love to see all of you interact if you are feeling strongly about what any or all of our panelists have discussed tonight. Send a letter to the editor, write an email, voices@commonsnews.org. Put a comment on our Facebook page. We'd love to hear from readers, and if you're not a reader, we'd love to have you reading our paper. This forum is going to be broadcast on Brattleboro Community Television. I'd love to thank Maria for filming, and we'd love to see you spread this far and wide. And finally, this doesn't come free. We're a nonprofit organization, and the Commons is published. The reason that we're here tonight, the reason that there are newspapers out there for you to enjoy, all of that comes from not only our advertisers, but from our members. It's like public radio and print. We need your help. So if you've found value in what we brought you here tonight, I hope you'll reciprocate that with a little bit of love in our donation box. I really appreciate that, and we appreciate you. So thank you all for coming here tonight. This has been fantastic.